The ability to automatically record bank sweeps inside of Intacct without any human interaction is one way that Intacct can be used to increase efficiency from a cash management perspective. I'm going to go through how that can be set up in Intacct. Now, prior to setting up automatic bank sweep recording, there are some additional things that can be set up in advance. So first, I want to go into my checking account here. And with each of these accounts that are going to have sweeps set up, there's some automatic connections you'll want to make first. So I'll come into edit my bank account, come into the banking cloud and click on connect. Now the reason why you might want to do this before you set up the bank sweeps is because if there are any errors in the process or if things aren't working correctly, it's good to know if you're not connecting to the bank or if there's something specific with the sweeps that aren't working. So establishing that connection first is going to identify where there might be an interruption or something's not working properly. So to connect to the bank, you'll first come in here to the banking cloud, type in your bank name or select from the common list of banks here to connect. Now, the first time you're presented with this connection, you'll sign into your bank account, and different banks handle the authentication process in different ways. Some banks may text you a number that needs to be typed in to the screen inside of Intacct. Others may ask you a security question, or others may have you log into your bank account and approve the connection to Intacct. Once that connection is made, then the bank feeds can start. Now the bank feeds are going to come into Intacct several times a day, about 4 times a day typically. As those transactions clear the bank, Intacct will see those transactions as cleared and follow any rules that you set up based off of those transactions. So the next thing we need to do is to set up some of those rules. So in my sample company here, in my demonstration, I've set up just a generic rule that might clear the bank account or the checks that you've written out of the bank account. So if I come into this bank account rule, you'll see I'm not filtering any transactions here. So this rule is going to apply to all the transactions that come through my bank feed. I'm not grouping transactions either. In this case, I'm looking at transactions that are one bank transaction to one Intacct transactions. But the group by gives us the ability to summarize many transactions into one, either many Intacct transactions to one bank transaction or vice versa. In this case, I've just set up a very simple matching condition where I'm saying the bank posting date is within 60 days of the Intacct posting date. The document number in the bank is equal to the document number in Intacct, and that dollar amount in the bank equals the dollar amount in Intacct. So if all these scenarios match up, then a match will be initiated inside of Intacct. Very simple rule, and you can create additional rules as well. So once you've set up one rule, then you can come into your rule set and assign that rule to your rule set. Now, typically, a rule set is going to be a group of similar bank accounts from the same bank are going to have the same set of rules. So, for example, all my WF checking accounts are going to use the same sets of rules to indicate when a transaction has cleared the bank. Savings account might have some different rules in them. And different bank accounts from different banks are going to have different rules as well. So if I come into this rule, for example, I can see this rule set. You can see I've added one rule here, my document number rule. And if I click on the accounts tab, you can see I've assigned it to 2 different bank accounts, checking accounts specifically. Now, once I've established that rule, then transactions can start downloading from the bank and feeding into transactions in Intacct. Now, another thing I'll point out here is in my bank accounts, So if I come into my list of checking accounts, I've set up a custom view that has some fields related to the bank feed status. So for example, you can see the status that's been connected, and the last column here is the last transactions received, which is going to indicate the date that the last connection sent transactions to Intacct. So if you have transactions on a daily basis, you would be able to see those days in the window here. So just a helpful tool to be able to see what's going on. And oftentimes we'll add this to a dashboard. Okay, once that established connection has been made and we're downloading transactions from the bank, we're ready to automatically record those bank sweeps. There's a few different things to set up to get that to go through. And the first thing I'll talk about here on the general ledger is my journals. Now, this isn't necessarily required, but I would advise to do it because it's helpful to be able to see the transactions come across. So I've set up one journal called Bank Sweeps using the symbol ZBA for zero balance accounts, which some bank accounts call these sweep accounts. Once that journal is established, then we're ready to create our transaction template. Now, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the layout of these accounts. So I've got a very simple workflow here where I've got one savings account and two checking accounts. And perhaps the sweep is happening with both checking accounts. Now, if you have this type of a scenario, you can be more efficient when you set up the accounts if you create the sweep transactions at the checking account level. That's because we can set up one rule and assign it to the checking accounts, and it's going to automatically record those other half of the transaction in the savings account. So the offset of that rule is going to affect the savings account. You can probably envision that if I created the rule on the savings account, I would have to have two different rules that indicate offsettings to each checking account. But this way, if we set it up so that the sweep happens at the checking account, we can set up only one rule and accomplish the same thing. Okay, so what do those rules look like? Let's jump back into Intacct. First, before we set up the rules, we're going to come in and set up a transaction template. So under the transaction templates, we can see a journal entry as an option, and we'll take a look at that. So I've already set one up, one transaction template called ZBA sweep transactions, and then it indicates which bank account I'm setting that up for. Now I can use this on both checking accounts because the offset account is going to be my savings account, and the account where the transaction happens is going to be in the specific checking account. So real simple selection here. We're going to indicate that journal that we just set up and the offsetting savings account down below. Once that template has been created, now we're ready to set up our create rule. So if I come into my rules, you can see this create rule. Come in to edit that create rule. You can see that rule type is a create rule. I can give it a name and say it's active. Now I'm going to filter the transactions that are going to use this rule. And your specific filter is going to be unique to your bank account. So you're going to want to look at your bank statement and see how that bank account indicates those sweep transactions. So I've put in some examples here. One requirement that Intacct has is you have to have a starting date. So I've indicated my bank transactions posting date is greater than and whatever starting date I want to indicate here. Now Intacct will go back to that starting date and record all of the transactions that meet this rule all the way through to date. Some bank accounts have a maximum number of days that it will go back and send the transactions to. So if that's 90 days, then you're not going to get any transactions prior to that 90 days, for example. So the other two filters I've indicated here is that my bank transactions descriptions all begin with ZBA. So if you're looking at your bank statement and you can indicate which transactions are the sweep based off of the description starts with ZBA, that's how you can use this example, this rule here. Another filter here I've indicated is that the bank description has to contain the word transfer. Okay, so that's going to indicate which transactions from the bank should follow this rule. Again, I'm not grouping by any transactions, but down here on the bottom, we're going to define what type of transaction we're going to create. So you can see I'm using the transaction type of journal entry. I'm creating a journal entry, and I'm going to use the template that I've just set up with my offset account as my savings account. So pretty simple setup here. We're going to indicate what that rule is. The next thing we need to do is assign that rule to our rule set. So we're going to go into the rule set that the checking accounts are using. All right, so far I've just have that document number match rule, but I'm going to select my rule and select my bank sweep rule. I'm going to add that to my checking accounts. Okay, once that has been done, the next time Intacct connects to the bank, it's going to backdate to whatever date I've set as my starting date and download all the transactions that follow that rule and create those transactions inside of Intacct. I'm going to give you an example here of a bank account that we use that has already done that. So if I look at my ZBA journals here, you can see on a near daily basis, those transactions are getting recorded using whatever description is in my bank statement. So these are automatically created transactions through the bank sweeps rule. It's going to indicate that the rule that was used here to create the transaction and have all the information on the transaction that was posted. So that concludes the setup for the bank sweeps. That's really going to automate all of those transactions through your bank account and save you a lot of time if you're used to doing that manually.